you, Heather. Madam Vice President, I'd like now to introduce Erica McAfee, another doula and mother, and the founder and CEO of Sisters in Loss, which is a podcast series for mothers who've experienced loss in pregnancy and childbirth. Erica was on life support following the birth of her son, Maxwell. She's also experienced early miscarriage and stillbirth at 39 weeks in previous pregnancies. Erica, we'd love to hear your story.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you all for allowing me to share. My journey to motherhood began with losing two babies, as you mentioned, and almost losing my life with my son. I lost my first son due to his lungs not being developed at 39 weeks and showing signs of preeclampsia. I went to the hospital to be induced because of my high blood pressure and me building up fluid all over my body. I labored, I pushed, and then the doctors made a decision to complete a cesarean. I remember it like yesterday being rolled into the operating room, seeing the bright lights, and the doctor saying, "Happy birthday" to my baby boy, but he didn't cry. I knew something was wrong as the folks ran to his side to try to revive him. And 41 minutes later, he passed away. They pronounced him dead. They rolled him into the recovery room with me and basically told me to say my goodbyes. The hospital I was at was gracious enough to move me and my family to a different floor. They put a marker on the door to let people know that I had a son that passed away, and they allowed me to spend as much time with him as I needed, with taking pictures and doing handprints and footprints and making molds and really creating those memories that I would need, later on, after, we actually funeralized him. They gave me all the resources that I need, a chaplain, a funeral home list, where could I cremate him if I wanted to cremate him. And even at that hospital, they had a memorial service quarterly where they were able to honor babies who passed away during childbirth. After many months of grieving and therapy, I tried again because I knew I wanted to become a mother. This time I got pregnant with a little girl. Throughout that pregnancy, my doctors made sure they did all the first trimester screenings to ensure that this baby would not have the same outcome as my son, but it did not. At 18 weeks, I went into preterm labor due to cervical insufficiency or having an incompetent cervix, and I lost my baby. I came into the ER and they said there was nothing they could do at 18 weeks because my pregnancy wasn't viable, which is at 24 weeks gestation. So I started to go crazy again because I'm leaving the hospital empty-handed. I'm grieving the loss of my first son, but also grieving this loss of my daughter. And I ended up, going back and finding support groups online, getting really navigating really what grief and healing and loss look like for myself. And then I was at a place where I wanted to try again to become a mother again. And I did. I was able to get pregnant with a son this time. The same doctors who delivered my son and my daughter were both the two primary OBGYNs I saw throughout that entire pregnancy. And at 19 weeks, I ended up going through a major surgery and got a cerclage placed, which is a cervical stitch to ensure that that pregnancy prolonged. And I went through that pregnancy without any major complications up until 32 weeks. At 32 weeks, I arrived at the emergency room and I immediately knew something was wrong. I wasn't in labor, but something just was off. The doctor that delivered my stillborn son was the doctor who was on call that day. And if she wasn't there that day, if she didn't know me, she didn't know my story, she didn't listen to me, I wouldn't be here sitting with you all today. Immediately, within 15 minutes of me arriving in the emergency room, she rolled me back and I was on the operating table for a crash emergency C-section. I had a full placenta abruption. I lost so much blood that I had to have 8 blood transfusions. I was on life support and my family was called in. My son was able to be born. He was resuscitated at birth. And as a result of his not having oxygen at birth, he does have special needs and a disability. He was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at 1 year old. I knew, and then also as a part of the life-saving mechanism for doctors to save my life, they had to give me a partial hysterectomy at 28. So I was faced with this bout of infertility, before 30, and then, raising a child with a disability that I didn't know what the outcome would be. But I knew that there were other Black women who experienced a traumatic birth, pregnancy complications like me, and I wanted to hear their stories. I wanted to amplify their voices through podcasts. So I started Sisters in Loss back in 2017 to share those stories really behind the statistics we talked about here today, and really help Black women replace silence with storytelling around their pregnancy loss and infertility complications. The stigma and shame that comes with sharing loss stories prevent Black women from achieving the healing they need to thrive in their new normal. Sisters in Loss holds that space for people to present those stories in a resourceful and culturally acceptable way to assure Black women that they're not alone on this journey. Heather Wilson was my first podcast guest, and through our shared experiences, we've become great friends and really sisters in this fight. Sisters in Loss is streamed in over 50 countries, has over 700,000 downloads, and is an online support community for Black and brown women to come and gather and get the healing they need to really thrive after loss. Since the pandemic has started, we have all been at home, and a lot of our sisters wanted some additional training. So we have trained and certified over 150 doulas and birth workers to provide childbirth education, breastfeeding and chest feeding support, birth, postpartum, and bereavement doula services in their local communities to have a greater impact, but also to have those connections to community resources.
Erica, powerful.
In the podcast, what are the questions that come up most frequently? Because you have created such an important vehicle, like you said, that you're replacing silence with storytelling, right? Reminding them of the power of their voice.
Absolutely.
And what comes up most often in those stories?
I think the main thing that comes up is that people have not had the opportunity to share their story, and like we're doing here, in its entirety. So once they are able to do so, they feel a sense of relief, they feel a sense of comfort, they feel this safe space to be able to say, I know that someone on the other end that's listening is going to hear something from my story and become healed from their, underlying condition, whether that is uterine fibroids or endometriosis or PCOS, which a lot of Black women face. They share those stories openly and transparently and really provide a healing place for themselves, but also those who are listening.
And are there commonalities around how they tell you their experience in the healthcare system?
Absolutely. Everyone, very similar to what Heather said, has said that they are not being heard, that they're not being listened to. And, I wanted to share that part of my story because I know that if that OBGYN did not listen to me, I would not be here today. I would have been gone because my family was called in. So we just need to be listened to and heard, especially when it comes to pain throughout the reproductive system.
So I anticipate that there are women and their families who are watching this who are pregnant now. What kind of advice would you give them about how they can empower themselves in the system? And they're powerful. I don't mean to suggest they don't have power, but give us some
Absolutely.
tools. What are the
Absolutely.
tools?
Yes. So I always tell people that they have to create the right birth team for them. So whether that looks like maybe getting a second opinion if they had an underlying condition, changing and switching providers, and then ensuring that a doula or a midwife is a part of their entire birth team, and they're all working together with the fertility specialist, the OBGYN, to ensure that they have a healthy outcome.
Why is the doula piece important? Why is the midwife
Doulas
piece
are
important?
so important because not only do we provide the emotional and informational support, but we help and teach our clients how to truly advocate for themselves in the settings, whether they're in the emergency room or in their OBGYN clinic or in a hospital setting, we teach them exactly what to say, how to do, and how to move through and navigate the system as needed.
Thank you so much, Erica.
You're welcome.
Your leadership is really inspiring. I'd now like to introduce Donna Trim Stewart, who's a proud native of Trinidad and Tobago. She's a mom and a grandmother, and she's the founder of Empowering Awakening Resource Center, which offers support to children and young people to build the skills that they need for adulthood. Donna lost her daughter, Arika Trim, a former Capitol Hill staffer who died a week after childbirth, and she is now the primary caretaker of Arika's son, Jai.